Right now, like inside you, there is this microscopic, incredibly high-stakes tightrope walk happening. I mean, it literally makes a gymnast performing without a net look like an amateur.
Oh, absolutely.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are jumping into chapter 31 of a medical physiology textbook today, exploring the really dense but utterly fascinating world of acid-base regulation.
Yeah, it's a heavy topic, but it's so important.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is basically to decode this invisible balancing act. We're going to figure out how your body keeps its fluids perfectly calibrated, so your cellular machinery doesn't just spontaneously shut down.
Right, which it would do very quickly otherwise.
Exactly. And along the way, you are going to get a master class in biological detective work. But I want to start with this statistic I found in the text because it blew my mind.
It's a staggering number.
It is.
Yeah.
We hear about sodium all the time, right? The sodium concentration in your extracellular fluid is about 142 units of measurement. But the hydrogen ion concentration, the actual microscopic particles that determine your acidity, is 0.00004 units.
Yeah, it's almost impossibly small.
I mean, that means there is roughly 3.5 million times more sodium than hydrogen floating around in your blood right now.
Okay, let's unpack this. How on earth does the human body maintain a number that small without accidentally drifting off course and killing us?
Well, it truly is a microscopic tightrope. And the margin for error isn't just small. It's almost entirely non-existent. To understand the mechanism, we first have to look at the stakes of that specific number.
Right.
Because that tiny concentration of hydrogen ions, that dictates our blood's pH. And just as a quick refresher on the chemistry for everyone listening, it's an inverse relationship.
So low pH means a high concentration of hydrogen.
Exactly. And a high pH means low hydrogen. Normal arterial blood pH is locked at exactly 7.4.
And when you say locked, you mean really locked.
Rigidly locked.
Yeah.
If that number drops below 6.8, which is a state known as acidemia, or rises above 8.0, alkalemia, you simply cannot survive for more than a few hours. Wow. Just a few hours.
Yeah. Because the proteins and enzymes that run literally every metabolic function in your cells, they require that precise 7.4 environment. If the pH shifts, the physical shape of those proteins literally warps. They just stop functioning entirely.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
Because we are constantly eating, right?
Right.
And exercising and producing biological waste. So something has to be catching us every time we start to wobble.
Oh, constantly. The body is always correcting.
And the text outlines 3 distinct lines of defense for this. The first one operates in mere seconds, which is the chemical buffers.
Yes, the first responders.
Right. And the best way to picture these is like as molecular sponges, because they don't actually get rid of the acid or the base. They just soak it up instantly and hold it temporarily.
Exactly. They absorb the blow.
Yeah, they take the hit, so the acid doesn't wreck the blood's overall pH while the body, figures out a permanent solution.
And the most important of these extracellular sponges is the bicarbonate buffer system. It's composed of a weak acid, carbonic acid, and a bicarbonate salt, like sodium bicarbonate.
Okay.
So when a highly reactive, dangerous, strong acid enters the bloodstream, this chemical system intercepts it immediately.
Like it jumps on the grenade.
That's a great way to put it. The bicarbonate binds to the aggressive hydrogen ion, neutralizing it by converting that strong acid into a very weak one, which eventually just breaks down into simple water and carbon dioxide.
I was completely stuck on this one paradox in the text, though.
Oh, about the mathematical efficiency.
Yes. Because if blood has to stay at a 7.4 pH, why is our main chemical sponge mathematically calibrated for a completely different environment?
What's fascinating here is that, biochemically speaking, the bicarbonate system should be a terrible buffer for human blood.
Right. It makes no sense on paper.
Exactly. Every chemical buffer has a mathematical sweet spot, a specific pH level where it works most effectively to absorb changes. That is called its pK value.
Okay, pK value.
And the pK of the bicarbonate system is 6.1. It is operating incredibly far away from our blood's normal pH of 7.4.
Which is huge in logarithmic terms.
Massive. If you put this exact buffer system into a closed glass test tube at a 7.4 pH, it would be overwhelmed almost instantly by normal metabolic acids, because it's operating on the weakest part of its mathematical curve.
Wait, then why on earth is it our primary defense? Like, why rely on a biological sponge that is structurally operating completely outside of its optimal range?
Because the human body is not a closed test tube.
Oh.
We are an open, dynamic system. This seemingly weak buffer is actually our most powerful shield because its two main components are constantly being restocked, and they're directly controlled by two massive organ systems.
Okay, so it's not acting alone.
Not at all. The lungs actively vent the carbon dioxide, and the kidneys aggressively control the bicarbonate levels,
Hmm.
unlike a sponge sitting in a bucket that eventually becomes completely saturated and useless.
Which would happen in the test tube.
Right. This molecular sponge is constantly being wrung out by your lungs and refilled by your kidney.
Oh, wow. That reframes the whole concept for me. So it's not about the static strength of the sponge, it's about the speed of the resupply chain.
Precisely. It's about flow.
And just to touch on the other buffers the text mentioned quickly, there is the phosphate system. It has a sweet spot of 6.8. So while it isn't the main player in the blood, it is vital in the kidney fluids and inside our actual cells.
Very important intracellularly.
Yeah, and plus, intracellular proteins like the hemoglobin carrying oxygen in our red blood cells, they actually do about 60 to 70% of the total chemical buffering for our body fluids.
And those cellular proteins handle an immense load, but relying purely on buffers is still just a stopgap.
Right.
Once those molecules are holding on to an acid, they are occupied. The ledger hasn't been balanced, the acid is just temporarily hidden.
Which brings up the second line of defense. Because, like you said, a sponge is only useful until it's soaked. Eventually, you have to wring it out.
You do!
And that is what respiratory control is doing, right? And it kicks in within minutes.
Yeah.
Because just by existing, our cells are generating acid. Yeah, as they metabolize food to create energy, they constantly produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct. And while carbon dioxide isn't a direct acid on its own, the moment it mixes with water in the blood, it forms carbonic acid.
And that's where the lungs come in. They act as the body's exhaust bellows to handle this constant acid generation.
The bellows, I love that image.
By simply changing alveolar ventilation, basically how deeply and quickly we breathe, we can vent that excess carbon dioxide into the air.
It's amazing.
And the sheer power of this mechanism is staggering. The source notes that if you just double your normal breathing rate, you can raise your blood pH by 0.23 in minutes.
Wait, really?
Yeah, you could take your pH from a perfectly balanced 7.40 up to a highly alkaline 7.63 just by breathing faster.
So if I just sit here right now and intentionally hyperventilate for a few minutes, am I actively turning my own blood alkaline?
You are inducing a state of respiratory alkalosis.
That's wild.
By breathing that fast, you're venting carbon dioxide faster than your cells are naturally producing it, which literally drains the acid concentration right out of your blood.
Oh, wow.
And this is exactly the physiological mechanism happening to people when they quickly ascend to high altitudes where oxygen is thin or during moments of extreme anxiety and panic attacks.
Because they're hyperventilating.
Right.
Yeah.
The brain controls this entire process on a subconscious negative feedback loop. When blood gets too acidic, the respiratory center in the brainstem is stimulated, and you automatically start taking deeper, faster breaths.
And then the reverse is true.
Exactly. When your blood gets too alkaline, your breathing naturally depresses to trap carbon dioxide and bring the acid levels back up.
But relying on the lungs has a pretty fatal flaw, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, they are incredibly fast at shifting pH, but the text says they are only about 50 to 75% effective at completely fixing a major disturbance.
Yeah, they can't finish the job.
Because you can't just stop breathing to fix an alkaline pH. Eventually, your need for oxygen overrides the need to balance the acid.
That's exactly the bottleneck. The oxygen-sensitive chemoreceptors in your body will always pull the emergency brake.
Oxygen always wins.
Always. If your blood is too alkaline, your brain tells your lungs to slow down to hold on to acid. But if you slow down too much, oxygen levels plummet, those chemoreceptors sound the alarm, and you are forced to gasp for air.
Which completely halts the pH correction.
Right. Plus, the lungs are often the very organs causing the imbalance in the first place,
Yeah.
like in patients with severe emphysema who physically cannot exhale enough carbon dioxide.
So since the lungs are this fast but flawed fix, who permanently clears the ledger?
The heavy artillery.
Exactly, the third line of defense. It takes hours or even days to fully activate, but it's the ultimate fixer, the kidneys. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the volume of work the kidneys do every single day is, it's hard to fathom.
It really is a massive operation.
The source notes, they filter roughly 4,320 units of bicarbonate every single day. To prevent you from just peeing out all of your body's precious buffer, the kidneys have to actively secrete 400 units of hydrogen just to reel that bicarbonate back into the blood.
And that's just the baseline.
Right, because on top of that, They have to dispose of 80 units of heavy, non-volatile metabolic acids that your lungs simply cannot breathe out.
It is a relentless, microscopic recycling plant. And in the early plumbing of the kidneys, they handle the bulk of this using secondary active transport.
How does that work?
Well, they essentially use the momentum of sodium ions rushing into the kidney cells to mechanically throw a hydrogen ion out into the waste fluid.
Oh, like a revolving door.
Exactly. And that bulk process handles about 95% of the recycling. But the true precision work, the real heavy lifting, happens at the very end of the line, in the late stage collecting tubules.
Right, where the specialized type A intercalated cells live.
Yes, those specific cells don't use momentum. They use direct cellular energy, ATP, to physically pump hydrogen ions against a massive concentration gradient.
Okay.
They can concentrate hydrogen ions in the urine up to 900-fold compared to the blood.
Wait, a 900-fold gradient?
Yes.
That's the equivalent of pushing a boulder up a sheer cliff face. How does a single cell marshal the energy to push acid into an environment that is already literally saturated with it?
It burns an immense amount of localized energy, and it has to, because if those specific pumps fail, the acid simply backs up into the bloodstream.
Wow.
But getting the free acid into the urine is only half the battle.
Why?
Because there is a strict limit to how much free hydrogen liquid urine can hold before it hits its absolute floor, which is a pH of 4.5.
Okay.
Once the urine reaches that 4.5 acidity level, the pumps physically cannot push any more hydrogen against the gradient. It's a wall.
And this is where the kidneys perform what I can only describe as biological alchemy. Because when the urine gets too acidic to take more hydrogen, they don't just recycle existing bicarbonate, they synthesize brand new buffer from scratch.
Yes, the ammonia buffer system.
It's so cool.
When the body faces chronic severe acidosis and the normal chemical sponges are totally maxed out, the kidney cells change their strategy. They pull an amino acid called glutamine, which is synthesized by the liver right out of the blood.
Okay.
The kidneys metabolize this glutamine, tearing the molecule apart to forge 2 new ammonium ions and 2 entirely new bicarbonate ions.
Wait, so they're literally ripping apart proteins to build new shields?
Ripping apart proteins, exactly. The ammonium is secreted into the urine. And ammonium is brilliant because it traps the hydrogen in a complex molecule.
So it hides it.
Right, meaning it doesn't contribute to the free acid that lowers the urine's pH. It locks the acid in a toxic bubble to be flushed away safely.
That is genius.
Meanwhile, those 2 newly forged bicarbonate ions are pushed directly back into the bloodstream to replenish the body's exhausted defenses. And during severe acidosis, this emergency manufacturing system can ramp up to excrete a staggering 500 units of acid per day.
Unbelievable. So what does this all mean? Like, why do you, listening to this right now, need to know about type A intercalated cells and glutamine metabolism?
That's a fair question.
Well, it's because everyday illnesses and simple lifestyle choices constantly push this vast machinery to the brink, right?
They absolutely do. Clinically, these breakdowns are divided into 2 distinct categories. If the root cause is a breathing issue, it's a respiratory disorder.
Okay, like what?
Conditions like pneumonia or chest trauma, things that prevent the lungs from venting carbon dioxide, that causes respiratory acidosis.
Got it.
But if the problem stems from gaining heavy acids or losing chemical buffers somewhere else in the body, it is termed a metabolic disorder.
And I found the textbook's examples of metabolic disorders absolutely mind-bending, particularly how the digestive system interacts with all this.
Oh, the digestive impacts are huge.
Yeah, so if you catch a stomach bug and vomit, you are expelling massive amounts of hydrochloric stomach acid. By losing that much acid, your blood becomes relatively basic, throwing you into metabolic alkalosis.
Correct.
But if that same stomach bug causes severe diarrhea instead, the underlying physiology flips completely. The fluids in the lower gastrointestinal tract are densely packed with bicarbonate.
They are.
So severe diarrhea means you are rapidly draining your body's primary chemical sponge. That causes metabolic acidosis, which the text says is often lethal if untreated, especially in small children.
Yes, very quickly lethal.
2 very common digestive symptoms, creating 2 completely opposite, life-threatening pH emergencies.
It perfectly illustrates how intertwined our fluid systems are. And there are other highly common metabolic triggers, too.
Like diabetes, right?
Exactly. In diabetes mellitus, particularly when a patient lacks insulin, their cells are locked out of using glucose for energy. The body thinks it's starving, so it rapidly starts burning fat stores instead.
And that creates acid.
Yes, the byproduct of burning fat at that emergency rate is acetoacetic acid. which quickly floods the blood, resulting in a critical state called diabetic ketoacidosis.
Wow.
We also see severe metabolic acidosis when someone ingests certain poisons like antifreeze or massive overdoses of aspirin, which itself is an acid.
And people inadvertently trigger metabolic alkalosis all the time with everyday items, too.
Oh, constantly.
Taking certain diuretic medications alters the fluid flow in the kidneys, tricking them into hoarding too much bicarbonate, or even just eating too many baking soda antacids for heartburn can overload the bloodstream with base.
Yep. It's very easy to throw the system off.
So if a patient rolls into an emergency room unconscious, how do doctors figure out what's happening? How do they untangle whether the patient is suffering from respiratory acidosis, respiratory alkalosis, metabolic acidosis, or metabolic alkalosis?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires a very specific blood draw from an artery. The medical team checks 3 critical values: the pH, the carbon dioxide pressure, and the bicarbonate concentration. And they map these 3 numbers onto an acid-base nomogram, which is essentially a dense diagnostic grid with intersecting zones.
Like a scatter plot.
Sort of. If the patient's numbers land squarely in one of the shaded zones, it indicates a simple disorder, a single root cause.
Right.
But if the numbers fall in the dead space between zones, the physician immediately knows they're dealing with a mixed disorder. Like, a patient might have chronic emphysema causing respiratory acidosis, but also have severe diarrhea, adding metabolic acidosis to the fire.
Oh, man. Untangling a mixed disorder sounds like a complete nightmare.
It can be.
But the text introduced my absolute favorite diagnostic trick for this, the anion gap.
It is a brilliant tool.
It really is, and it's just simple math.
Mhm.
You take the measured positive sodium in the blood, and you subtract the sum of the measured negative bicarbonate and chloride. Normally, this leaves a mathematical gap of about 8 to 16 units.
Yep.
The best way to visualize this is as a strict financial audit of your bloodstream, because by the absolute laws of physics, your blood must maintain strict electrical neutrality. Every positive charge must have a corresponding negative charge.
Always.
But standard hospital labs don't waste time measuring every single obscure negative ion floating in your veins. So, if the gap between the positive sodium you can see and the negative chloride and bicarb you can see suddenly balloons to a massive number, the auditor knows the books are cooked.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. There are unmeasured negative charges lurking in the blood.
Exactly. The anion gap is the ultimate red flag for an attending physician. When that gap gets wildly wide, the auditor knows there are hidden accounts.
Hidden acids.
Yes. It strongly indicates that unmeasured heavy acids are flooding the system. Things like lactic acid from dying tissue, keto acids from diabetes, or toxins from ingested poisons.
But what if the patient is clearly suffering from metabolic acidosis, but the auditor runs the numbers and the anion gap is perfectly normal?
Well, that tells the physician exactly where to look next.
How so?
A normal gap means that as the negative bicarbonate was lost, the negative chloride ions naturally rushed in to fill the empty seats and maintain that electrical neutrality.
Oh, to balance the books.
Right. When chloride fills the void, it's called a hyperchloremic state. That specific chemical signature points the detective away from hidden toxins.
Okay.
And it points directly toward conditions where the buffer is physically leaking out of the body, like severe diarrhea, or situations where the kidney's specialized pumps are failing to secrete hydrogen or reabsorb the buffer properly.
It is phenomenal how these microscopic electrical charges lock together to tell a story about what is failing inside our cells.
It really is.
So let's step back and look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
We started with an incredibly fragile, razor-thin margin for life. Your body is fighting every second to maintain a microscopic fraction of a unit of hydrogen just to keep your blood strictly at a 7.4 pH.
A literal tightrope.
Yeah. And to keep you from falling off that tightrope, you rely on 3 intricate bodyguards. You have the fast-acting chemical sponges soaking up the immediate metabolic hits.
Great.
You have the exhaust bellows of your lungs adjusting carbon dioxide minute by minute.
Mm-hmm.
And when the heavy lifting is required, you have the slow, relentless recycling plant of your kidneys,
The heavy artillery.
using specialized cells to push acid up massive gradients and acting as alchemists to forge new buffer from scratch.
Yeah.
So the next time you are like gasping for air after hiking up a mountain, or you're recovering from a terrible stomach bug, take a second to appreciate the sheer biological mathematics working flawlessly to keep your enzymes from shutting down.
You know, this raises an important question, though. When we look at how human biology interacts with the modern world,
Oh, what do you mean?
well, The source notes that our baseline daily non-volatile metabolic acid load, those 80 units the kidneys have to clear every single day,
Right.
that load is primarily generated from the normal breakdown of the proteins we consume.
Okay, proteins make acid.
Right. And our renal ammonia buffer systems, those alchemists ripping apart glutamine, they evolved over millennia to handle that specific baseline load.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
What happens to the structural integrity of our kidneys over decades when we adopt extreme modern dietary trends?
Oh, wow.
For instance, ultra-high protein fad diets that drastically skew our macronutrient intake. By eating massive quantities of protein at every single meal, we are continuously flooding the bloodstream with excess metabolic acids from protein breakdown.
So we're overloading the system.
Are we inadvertently forcing our kidneys' emergency backup generators to run at maximum capacity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for years on end?
That is, wow.
It is certainly something to ponder the next time you review the macronutrient breakdown of your meals.
That is a deeply fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying thought to leave you with. It is a stark reminder that our daily lifestyle choices directly interact with these microscopic balancing acts. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden, invisible universe of the human body. We hope the next time you picture a high-stakes balancing act, you think about the millions of sodium and hydrogen ions walking the line right inside of you.